The next privileged motion is to raise a question of privilege, and that's a little confusing. Question of privilege, or to raise a question of privilege, is the second highest ranking privileged question. But what does it mean? Usually it means something that relates to the comfort of the body. And so an example of when to use a question of privilege is, let's say that the building is just really, really hot and members are starting to sweat and be very uncomfortable. A member might rise to a question of privilege to say, can we turn on the air conditioning? That would be an example of a question of privilege. And you could see why that would interrupt a motion, because it's something that we can just deal with really fast. Usually the chair can just rule on it and get on with it. And so you can take care of it and then get back to the business that's more important that you're actually talking about. And another example of a question of privilege might be to request that the speaker speak into the microphone better. We've all been at that meeting where the person is holding the microphone about 10 inches below their mouth and you can't hear them. And so that would be a great example of a question of privilege. And by the way, in that case, the question of privilege may interrupt the speaker for obvious reasons, because you can't hear the speaker. So it would be good to rise and respectfully state, Chair, question of privilege. The chair will recognize you and you state, may the speaker please speak into the microphone, and that would be a totally appropriate thing to do. A third example of a question of privilege is to go into executive session. As you can see, that's another example of a motion that relates to the status and comfort of the body. If a body is starting to talk about internal matters or personnel matters, the assembly, for the most part, usually has no requirements to have guests, unless it's some public body or something. And so if you have a private organization that doesn't have the obligation to include guests, a member can rise and move that the body go into executive session, which is a majority vote. And that is another example of a question of privilege. The newer edition of Robert's Rules, actually, the 12th edition, talks about how you can get out of executive session, because in the earlier edition, it didn't really talk about how you get out of executive session. And once again, that would be another motion, another question of privilege. So hopefully now you know how to use the question of privilege and hopefully make your meetings a little bit more comfortable. In the next one, we'll talk about the motion to recess. See you there.